All right. All right. Hello, everybody. I hope you're well. My name is JC Cortez, and I'm so happy you can be here on this Thursday afternoon. Uh, Thank you for joining us, and let's get started. My name is JC Cortez, and I'm the Director of Training and Development here at Synergia, the Metropolitan Parent Center. We have a great presentation for you today, and hopefully that gives you a lot of insight in a very long and somewhat confusing process. So don't feel like you're the only one that could be lost, because there is a lot to it. So we're here to help, and we're always happy to connect you with some of the best resources that we can find here in New York City to navigate special education at any time, but especially now during these uncertain times that is COVID-19 and this pandemic that we're all enduring together. Just a quick few words on Synergia. Synergia is a multi-service agency located here in Manhattan that has supported New Yorkers with disabilities and their families for the last 40 years. We offer a rich source of information and training tailored for parents, including parents whose primary language is not English or who they themselves have special training needs. We help them participate more effectively in their children's education and development, and we partner with professionals and policymakers to improve the outcomes for all children with disabilities. Synergia, which is Spanish for synergy, is one of New York City's 3 federally funded parent centers committed to serving people with disabilities and their families, with an added focus on communities of color and the economically disadvantaged. Synergia creates innovative programming ranging from transitional housing for homeless families to parenting classes for adult parents with intellectual disabilities, and parenting and education advocacy training for parents of children with disabilities. Before our amazing presenter gets started, we wanted to also let you know that we are broadcasting today's event live via our Facebook page, and we want to give a warm welcome to those of you rather, joining us there. We're also recording this webinar so that we can share it with you afterwards. It'll also be available on our Facebook page for future reference. We will be following up with an email with the presentation that we are going to show you, and any additional resources that we have for you that we think will be beneficial or that we found beneficial for our families. That will happen within 2 days. I like to keep it, but never know. But yes, and we will be pausing throughout this presentation for questions. So if you have any questions that you want addressed, please go ahead and post it in the Q&A box or the chat window if you're joining us on Zoom. If you're joining us on Facebook, please feel free to put it in the comments section. It will be relayed to us, and we will be addressing them as soon as we get a chance. But yes, and never worry, we'll have the last 10 to 15 minutes for questions and answers in case we haven't addressed them already. So yes, let's go ahead and get started. Today with us, we have Liliana Diaz Pedrosa. She's an attorney and the director of one of our fellow federal funded parent centers at Advocates for Children, which provides free capacity building and legal representation to New York City's most vulnerable families. Liliana left her native Puerto Rico to attend Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., where she graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Foreign Service. She earned her Juris Doctorate from Fordham University School of Law here in New York, where she fell in love with New York City. She has conducted literally hundreds of workshops and various aspects of New York education law and practice for parents and professionals. Thank you so much, Liliana. It's so good to have you back at Synergia and to see you again. I see you regularly now, and so yeah. But yes, thank you for being here. We're always striving to connect all of our families and children with the important resources and the best information, and we're so proud and so honored to have you and say that you are one of those resources. So please, by all means, carry on.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me, and also for that lovely introduction. So today, for those of you who are joining us, we are going to be talking about the Turning 5 process, creating the kindergarten IEP. And we are going to go through just a brief introduction before we get into legal rights, preparing for the IEP meeting, understanding the IEP. Then we're going to talk a little bit about program and services, some communication, what you should expect from the Department of Education, what information should be coming your way, a bit about applying to kindergarten, and finally resources. Throughout the time that we're together, I'm going to be taking questions. There will be some specific times that you will see, but also, as JC said, right afterwards. So introduction very quickly. As JC said, my name is Liliana Diaz-Pedrosa, and I am an attorney at Advocates for Children, where I direct the Parent Center at Advocates for Children. So who are we? Like Sinergia, we are an independent agency that protects the rights of New York City students. We're a parent center, and our services include a free helpline that runs Monday through Thursday from 10 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. The helpline number is 1-866-427-6033. We offer free legal services to families who are low income who live in New York City around any issue that has to do with education. The first line of defense, however, is always to contact our helpline. We have tons of guides and resources on our website, which is advocatesforchildren.org, and we provide workshops and trainings throughout the communities, usually in person, but now, of course, fully remote. And although we are remote, we are open for services. Now, the rules of today are pretty simple. You don't have to remember much. What you do have to remember is if you have a question, you should contact Sinergia, you should contact Advocates for Children. We can provide you with the information that you need, and so that you're not left with concerns. Okay, so today's presentation, transition to kindergarten. All children born in 2016 have the right to a public school kindergarten seat starting in September of 2021. So all children that are turning 5 between January 1st and December 31st of this year have the right to a public school kindergarten seat in September 2021. There are two processes that are separate for families of children with disabilities. The first is the kindergarten IEP process, which is the turning 5 process. And that is the more structured transition from the Committee on Preschool Special Education to the Committee on Special Education. How your child is going to receive services starting in kindergarten. And that's what we're going to talk about today. There is a second process, which is the kindergarten admissions process, which is the process for all students, students with disabilities, students without disabilities, applying to New York City Department of Education public schools. You may be familiar with that process because you should have already gone through it. The process for kindergarten applications for your community schools ended on the 22nd of January. I will talk briefly about what to do if you missed the deadline and you have not yet applied. But today we're going to concentrate really on turning 5, on the special education aspect of going to kindergarten. All right, let's talk a little bit about the law. So special education and the special education law that applies for children through the age of 21 comes from a federal law called the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It is a complex statute, but it can be really easily summarized by saying that all children with a disability have the right to a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. You may hear some of this being mentioned as, appropriate services, FAPE, LRE, the least restrictive environment, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Children, for the purposes of today, of course, are the children who are turning 5, who are going into the school age program that goes through the age from 5 to 21. All children with a disability are entitled to free appropriate public education in the least restrictive environments, so appropriate services. The heart of the special education law is that the school district has to create an appropriate program, a program that will enable a child to make progress, that is custom tailored to their individual needs, and present that program in an individualized manner, in writing, that summarizes all the services that a child will need for one school year. And that is the IEP, the Individualized Education Program. It is legally binding, like a contract, in that everything on the IEP has to be provided to the student. So if there is a service that a child requires and the service does not appear written on this IEP, the service will not be provided. However, every single service that appears on the IEP, that is written on the IEP, has to be implemented as written. It has to be provided in the same way as it was written. What this means is that the creation of the IEP becomes central to the special education system. The IEP must reflect the needs of a child, must reflect all the services that a child requires to be able to make progress. And it is created at a meeting with a multidisciplinary team that includes you, with a parent. Again, it's good for one school year. So how do you prepare for the kindergarten IEP meeting? There are multiple pieces that come into play. The Department of Education has a role, as does the preschool, and as do you. What is the role of the Department of Education? First, they need to give you a lot of information. They need to mail you information, for example, about when kindergarten orientations would take place in the fall and the spring. If you are unable to participate in these kindergarten orientation meetings, some information would be available on the kindergarten page at the Department of Education's website, okay? But if you were missing information, please confirm with your Committee on Preschool Special Education that your address is correct so that you don't miss any future meetings. You're going to be getting some mailings starting in December and continuing through this process, and you want to make sure that you receive all that information. Around December, or starting in December and perhaps even through January, you should be getting a blue letter, a color-coded letter, a blue letter, which is a notice of referral that begins the process of transitioning from preschool to school-age special education. In this letter, that signals the start of the transition process, the Department of Education will inform you of the name of your assigned representative from the Department of Education, who is usually a school psychologist or a school social worker, most likely the school psychologist or the school social worker from your zone school. And this person is going to review and collect information to create a full packet for them to have all evaluations, observations, and needed documents ready for the IEP meeting that will take place when your child turns 5. Now, you must know that this year you may have 2 IEP meetings. The IEP meeting for continuing preschool services, because your child will continue to be in preschool until the end of their 2020-2021 school year in either June or if they're a 12-month program, continuing through August. So you may require another IEP meeting just for continuation of the preschool services, but you will have also a kindergarten turning 5 IEP meeting. So there may be some confusion for some parents who will have these 2 meetings, but just know one may be for preschool and the other one may be for turning 5. Now, the Department of Education's representative is going to review the information that he or she receives for your child, and they will alert you if new assessments are required, if they believe that they need new evaluations or new observations. Now, of course, we're doing things remotely now. Know that evaluations could be done remotely or they could be done in person as appropriate, but more likely than not, remotely. Okay. Now, the Department of Education will schedule IEP meetings between February and May. So soon, some of you may start the IEP process. So that is the role of the Department of Education. The preschool's role is to prepare turning 5 progress reports, materials, and information to give to the Department of Education. Also, their role is going to be to assist you, to recommend services for your child, to speak with you about what to expect, to discuss with you about, and with the Department of Education, ideas as to what types of programs and services may be a good fit for your child. Now, know that nothing is going to be recommended until the turning 5, the kindergarten IEP takes place. So this is gathering information to make sure that all information is available. And your role in preparing for the kindergarten IEP meeting is really to learn as much as you can about this process. And being here is a really good first step. There'll be more information that you will acquire as time goes on. Take it step by step and visit schools virtually because we can't really go in right now, but you can ask the preschool if they believe that a specific type of program or a placement that they're familiar with would be appropriate for your child so that you can become familiarized with the types of services that they offer, to ask questions. Not every child will need new evaluations before the before the kindergarten IEP meeting. But if you believe that your child requires new evaluations, different evaluations, you can make that request, so that you can have a basis to start for kindergarten if you so wish. You can make a request to the Department of Education's representative, who is going to be identified in that blue notice that you should receive in the mail. If, by the way, just to pause for a second, if you find that you have not received your blue notice, your notice of referral, by the end of this month, please get in touch with the preschool to try to troubleshoot, to see if there is some sort of delay or if the mailing was sent and did not reach you. And the preschool should get in touch, or you can also get in touch directly with the Committee on Preschool Special Education for this Turning 5 part. Okay? All right. One last thing that you might want to do if your child needs medical accommodations for transportation, or has specific medical needs, this might be a good time to start getting information from their doctor so that you can also offer updated information to the Department of Education for the purpose of creating this new IEP. So far, so good? Done a lot of talking. So this might be a good time to pause to get some questions.
So far, so good. But there is a
Okay.
question. Who sends the letter? The preschool?
No, the Department of Education has the obligation of providing these notices so that you know where you are in the process. So the importance of the blue letter is because the Department of Education is letting you know, we know this child is going to kindergarten and needs to transition from preschool to school age special education. The preschool at this point, their only real function is to provide information about your child to the Department of Education to have so that they can have a complete set of accurate, updated information about a specific child's needs, and also to assist you in figuring out and informing you what they believe your child might need for next year. One more thing about the preschool, and that is that they're almost left out of this process, unless you inform them that you'd like for them to be included. So the Department of Education will get information from them, but for example, the Department of Education will not tell the preschool that an IEP meeting has been scheduled. So if you want the preschool's assistance at the IEP meeting, you want a teacher to participate, you want the preschool representative to be there, you really should inform the preschool when the IEP meeting is scheduled. Did I get that?
Yes, and
Okay.
there's a follow-up question from a different professional. I'm asking for an early kindergarten IEP meeting in February instead of June because Turning 5 meeting will be in the same month. Is this wise?
So I'm going to clarify. I think I misunderstood the question, but I think what you said is that you want the preschool IEP and the kindergarten IEP meeting to be in different months. Is that correct? Or
Yes.
let me just work on both scenarios. So there are two different IEP meetings that are happening at the same place. A continuation of the preschool services, so the preschool IEP meeting, and the Turning 5 IEP meeting for creating services for September. If the information is updated and accurate, yes, it can happen the same month. I think what might be harder is to try to separate the services that a child might need now from the services that you anticipate being put in place in September. It really, how you want to structure the meetings really is up to you. It might be that, and my best guess is that uh, you have right now information that is current through now. You may have information later that reflects some growth throughout the spring. Or you may have the parent wanting to request additional evaluations that may take, the usual time frame for creating evaluation. And so you have your pre-K meeting now and your kindergarten meeting later to accurately reflect all this information that's coming up. So it varies depending on, what your preferences are and just the timing of everything that's happening. It doesn't necessarily affect the services. In September, if you have all the information that you need right now, but if you feel that you need more time to create and obtain new information, then it would make sense to not have everything at the same time. I hope that makes sense. One thought about June is that the later your IEP meeting takes place. Excuse me one second, I'm being interrupted by a small child. Lucia, ahora no, por favor. Thank you. So and I just lost my train of thought and I'm coming back. The only thing about having a later IEP meeting is that if a child is recommended for a small classroom size, you may have less time to look at options that the Department of Education may have available. But that may not be the case. Sorry, that was a really long response with a bit of an interruption.
No, that was quite thorough. Thank
Okay.
you, Liliana. There is one more question. Can you please remind us when should we receive a blue letter and who to contact if we do not receive it?
Yes. So starting in December and through the month of January, you're going to get this notice of referral. So we're almost nearing, believe it or not, this is the last week of January. So say by next week you don't have a blue letter or notice of referral, you can contact the CPSE, the Committee on Preschool Special Education, to try to figure out what happened if it was not sent out properly. You can check in with the school, which I always suggest, just check in with the school and say, look, we haven't gotten our notice of referral. Have you heard anything? Is there a concern? Have other parents been experiencing the same problem? This is one that usually gets solved very quickly. But it's important to make sure that you did receive it so that you have that contact information for the Department of Education representative, and also that by when you should start expecting updates, evaluations, and everything else.
Perfect.
Far, so
All
good?
right. We're good.
All right.
Mhm.
Next one. All right, let's keep going. If you have questions throughout my my speaking, by all means, please ask the questions. We'll have more opportunities for questions. So some of you, if not all of you, are familiar with the IEP meeting and you know who's there. Well, let me tell you who's there. You, as the parent, have the right to be at the IEP meeting. You have the right to at least 5 days written notice. Although now during COVID, some phone calls are allowed. Most parents are getting IEP meeting notices via email. If you prefer mail, you should say so. If you do not have email and you prefer another way of communication, also let the Department of Education know so that they know how to best reach you. At the IEP meeting, there should be a special education teacher, a general education teacher where a child is expected to receive some sort of general education services, a school psychologist who explains the evaluations or changes in settings. This person usually acts as the chairperson for the meeting, a district representative who is familiar with the district services, and it could be the school psychologist. It could be the same person, school psychologist, who also performs the function of the district representative, and other people, including interpreters. So if your first language is not English and you would prefer to have somebody there who interprets the information that is being discussed at the IEP meeting, you have a right to it, offered by the Department of Education for free. Other people that should be included, people you wish to have there. For example, as I mentioned before, the preschool is not going to receive an automatic notice of the meeting. You are. So if you want to invite them to participate, this would be a really good opportunity because although a special education teacher should be present, you want to have the person who has worked with your child, who knows your child, who can explain what their needs may be, present. Service providers that you want to invite. You can also bring uh, other people who have worked with your child, or someone who has knowledge that they want to share, or someone for support. Now the meetings are being held virtually. Of course, I don't anticipate that by the end of this season, if you will, we're going to go back to in-person IEP meetings. So video conferencing by phone. An important part to know is that you should have copies of all the materials that are going to be discussed at the meeting ahead of the meeting. So again, via email or via mail, if that is your preference. Okay. Now, as we said before, I'm going to switch gears back again to what the law says. We talked about the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Improvement Act. And we said that all children with a disability are entitled to a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. Now, that fifth part, the free and appropriate public education, it means that eligible children between the ages, in this case of 5 and 21, would be able to receive services. Now, what establishes eligibility is if a child has a condition or a disability that affects their learning. And if this condition or disability falls under one of these 13 classifications of disability. Now, classifications are not diagnoses. These were made up in Congress, and I'll go through a few of these, if you will. But what it does is that it opens the door for a child to be able to receive services. And so in the preschool setting, all children had one classification that was listed on their IEP, and that is a preschooler with a disability. So no other definition of what their needs may be, only that there is a preschooler with a disability. Now, when they turn 5, to be eligible, they must have at least one possible classification, and only one is selected and only one is listed on the IEP. And all it does is open the door. And like I said, it is not a diagnosis. It is meaningless outside of the context of special education. For example, take autism. Autism is just a big bucket, and it doesn't define whether the child is high functioning, if they need structures and supports in a very highly specialized environment, or if they are functioning with supports or without supports in a general education environment. It just says autism. It has no specific connotation beyond generalized. I'll pick another one. Learning disability makes no distinction between a child who has a learning disability in reading, in processing, in math, for example. Emotional disturbance doesn't distinguish between a child who is depressed, highly withdrawn, a child who's experiencing trauma, or other sorts of emotional disturbances. You will see that there are some common things that we see in life that are not here. So anxiety, ADD, ADHD does not appear as a classification. However, what happens is that when you meet at the IEP meeting, the team will look at a child's specific needs and will say, oh, this sounds like it will go under learning disability, or this sounds like it might go under other health impairment, or this sounds like it might go under something else. A child may have multiple needs that may qualify, if you will, for multiple different classifications. However, like I said, only one is selected. Now, the key here is that the classification does not drive the service. The child's needs drives the service. The classification has the purpose of opening the door to establish eligibility. But what really determines the services is what's written on the IEP. So if you have a child who's on the spectrum and also has a learning disability or an intellectual disability, you might prefer one classification over another. You might say autism is the one that really reflects the main piece that I'm concerned about. And in the IEP, there should be supports and services that address the learning disability or the intellectual disability or the speech and language impairment or whatever else. Okay, so classification opens the door, but it does not define what a child might need. Need defines what the child is going to receive as written on the IEP. Okay, I'll let that sit for a second and we'll move on to the next. And we're going back to the IEP. Now, the IEP, the Individualized Education Program, which is that important document that summarizes all the services that a child is going to receive for up to one school year, has different parts. And all of these parts are very important. So I'll go through a few. These are not all the parts, these are some that we selected. But the first one that you're going to encounter is when you start the meeting, the school psychologist or the person who's appearing as the chairperson of the meeting is going to start talking about present levels of performance. What is that? The plop. And that is, in reviewing current information, we're looking at a snapshot of your child's abilities, where they need supports, where their strengths lie, perhaps some information about learning styles. So we want to have a current baseline from where to create the goals. So we want to know where we are today so that we can anticipate, with the services recommended, what can we expect we're going to reach, we're going to accomplish at the end of the year that the IEP is in place for. So the annual goals. Annual goals are really just what can you expect that a child is going to do if they receive this specific child, is going to accomplish with the supports and services that we're recommending. Now, annual goals have to be specific. They have to be clear. So for example, an annual goal that would not work would be my child, Johnny will improve in the areas of communication. That's not specific enough. Or Johnny will learn new words. That's not specific enough. It would have to say something like, Johnny will be able to answer who questions, what questions, why questions, 8 times out of 10, as defined by the teacher assessment. Or Johnny currently knows, the vowels. We anticipate that Johnny will know all the consonants by the end of the year and perhaps know how to blend them, or whatever it is. It's something that is more tangible, that you can look at it and say, oh, okay, this is what's supposed to happen at the end of the year. And this is how you're going to measure progress. And this is how I'm going to know that progress has taken place. The IEP is also going to tell you what the recommended program is. Now, when we talk about program, we talk about the type of service that a child is going to need. So for example, a program might be a small classroom size in a community school with speech therapy, occupational therapy, and counseling. So what is the collection of services that's going to make up your child's specific special education program? And that has to appear on the IEP, in addition to the related services and supports, which is, I misspoke, the pieces that accompany the child. So the program would be the type of classroom, the type of structure, the types of supports, and the related services, the additional supports like the therapies, the counseling, the transportation, the assistive technology that my child might need. Finally, there are sections on the IEP for you to reflect your own concerns, your own worries, the things that you are left wondering about. So if you're in agreement with the program and you think it's perfectly fine, that's one thing that you can include and say, my child will be able to make progress in this using these services. But if the opposite is true, if you're saying, you know what, I really don't think this will work, you can state your objections and request that your objections be noted, written on the IEP. So if you disagree that your child should get a service because you think there should be more or there should be less, you can say, I disagree with this recommendation. I believe there should be more, there should be less, it should be different, or whatever the circumstances are. But it's important to note your objections, that they be recorded, because if in the future there is a concern, you want to make sure and say, see, I mentioned this before, this is something that's ongoing and that cannot continue. And there may be some relief that you might be able to seek because you informed the Department of Education of your worries, okay? Now, let's talk a little bit about, we talk about the program, the type of services that a child would receive, in this case, the type of classroom. The Department of Education has what's called a continuum of services that goes from the least restrictive to the more restrictive. Think of it as a menu of services. So the general choices that they have available for students. Now, know, of course, that services are need driven. So these are just generalized. So if your child needs a part-time program in one of these types of classrooms, um, instead of a full-time program, that's also available, and that's a choice that you have because services are need driven. This is just a general presentation of the continuum of services, the main services that the Department of Education has to offer, from least restrictive to most restrictive, starting with general education with supports and services. So this will take place in your community school, the one that you applied for in kindergarten, for the kindergarten admissions process that you were admitted into. You have your general education classroom with typically developing students. And then the supports and services recommended on the IEP, paraprofessional, speech therapy, occupational therapy, counseling, nursing, et cetera, added to that mix. More restrictive, your integrated co-teaching classroom, which is it's not quite a hybrid program, but it's considered a general education program. In this classroom, you have a maximum of about 24 kids, 12 of whom have special education programs, have IEPs. And there are 2 teachers that are collaborating in instruction. So it's almost like a general education classroom with a subset of students with IEPs who are learning together. More restrictive than that, because you're moving away from the general education classroom, is a special class in a non-specialized school. So a community school. So you have your small self-contained classroom where all the students have been recommended to participate in a segregated setting. So 12 children with IEPs recommended to be in a classroom with 12 children. The teacher is a special education teacher. They have received special training to work with children who have been recommended for these settings. You may have a 12 to 1-to-1, a paraprofessional that's assigned to the whole classroom. So these smaller classrooms, as you go smaller, it means you're further away from general education, and the children that are recommended for these classroom settings require such structures, require specialized instruction, require more supervision. And as you go from community school, now skipping into special class in a specialized school, District 75, just a second, I'll explain, you go more restrictive. District 75 school is a smaller school, usually located inside a community school, but it's run separately. So it's separate from the community school. All the classrooms in this specialized school are small classroom sizes. So District 75 school will be located in a typical community school building, but the school is run separately and only has self-contained smaller classrooms for children who require structures and supports. So you can go from as big as your 12 to 1-to-1 classroom that you could have in a community school to much smaller, 6 to 1-to-1, 8 to 1-to-1, etc. More restrictive than that, when the Department of Education does not have a program that a service that is required by a student, they might just say, look, we don't have this type of service, but we will then recommend a non-public school, a state-approved non-public school, for you to be able to receive the services there. So it's considered to be more restrictive because now you're not even near your community school, you're separate from your community, you're going into a private school from a list of state-approved schools. Now, residential, of course, more restrictive, and home instruction is considered to be the most restrictive, not to be confused with homeschooling. Home instruction is a special education program that is offered to students who are unable to attend school because of a medical issue, of an emotional issue, something that prevents them from participating in school. It's supposed to be a temporary program while services are set up and the student is then able to return to school. Okay, let me see. We're going to talk about specialized program and just in time because I see there is a question coming in. So let me tell you about some specialized programs. Now, typically you would not be able to apply for special education services because services have to be recommended um, through the IEP process. So you wouldn't apply for a District 75 school. The Department of Education, after the creation of a special education program, if a recommendation is made for a District 75 setting in a specialized school, of course, the Department of Education would make you an offer of placement. It would tell you where they believe that a school is available to offer the services that were created on the IEP. There are some exceptions to this. So first, bilingual integrated co-teaching class or special or bilingual class, those are recommended in the IEP process. The Department of Education will find one for you. But then there are other programs, so ASD Nest and Horizon, for example, which are specialty autism programs that the Department of Education offers. The parents must apply. So ASD Nest is a general education program, District 75, I'm sorry, integrated general education program for high functioning children on the spectrum. The Horizon program is also a program for higher functioning children on the spectrum, but those children for the Horizon program don't tend to be as advanced as the Nest students. There are small classrooms that are sprinkled throughout New York City, and you would apply through there's an application process that you can look up on the Department of Education's website, and you would apply separately from the IEP process. When do you apply? As soon as you have the information to apply, you apply. So if you have all the information that you need right now to enter your ASD Nest or Horizon application, you send it right away. If you do not have all that information, then you wait. It is unclear how the Nest and Horizon acceptance process really goes. What I can tell you is that you send the application in independent of when the IEP meeting has taken place. And so if you're waiting for IEP meeting and you have all the information, you send it. If you already had your IEP meeting and you have the information, send it. They know what they're looking for. And based on the information provided, they can make a determination as to whether or not the program is appropriate for your child, if they have space, and if they wish to offer you a placement. Now, ACES is a program, it's a highly supportive program for children with intellectual disabilities. And same thing applies. It's by application. You would apply separately. You can go through the Department of Education's website to find out how. The iRead program is an ICT program that supports literacy. It is quite new. It is a very recent program. And there is some information as to how to go about applying online, but just so that you're familiar with what's available. Additional programs is the AIMS program, which is another program for children on the spectrum, but this is for children who need highly structured supports and who are on the spectrum. The AIMS program is different from what the Department of Education typically offers in their District 75 ASD autism programming, in that AIMS uses ABA, whereas the majority of the services the Department of Education offers through their District 75 settings may be more teach-based. So if you're looking for a program that is ABA-based for children who are in greater needs of supports and services and are on the spectrum, again, by application, that's AIMS. You don't need to apply, of course, for a barrier-free or accessible school if your child has a mobility need and they require a barrier-free or accessible setting. That can also be recommended on the IEP. That can also be mentioned on the IEP. It's not something that you need to apply for. It's something that you need to remember to include. Okay. All right. What's the time frame? Now, somebody asked about the time frame. It's unclear. That's what I was just saying. So I know it's a frustrating answer to hear because some of it, there are no specific timeframes for the application process for these specialized type programs. All I can tell you is that as soon as you have the information that you think is relevant, so the psychoeducational evaluation, speech and language evaluation, the battery of tests that you feel are sufficient, to create an appropriate program for your child, to then send that information um, to the emails where they receive the application to complete the application process. If it's roll-in admissions, if it's, we gather all the information and then we decide, it's unclear. And I just don't have that information to share. I'm so sorry. Um, so with that
Sure.
frustrating answer,
That, that
let me see if there are
I
any
know
others.
that is kind of frustrating, but it is kind of you just roll with the punches on that one.
Yeah.
There was a question: do all public schools provide ICT teaching?
Yes, I should have mentioned that before. I'm so sorry. Every single public school should offer, let me go back, these services. These are the ones that you're going to find in your community school, your districts 1 through 32. The one that is of note is, of course, the small classroom sizes. So most schools will offer some sort of small classroom size. The key here is that whatever is offered is appropriate for your child and meets your child's IEP's recommendation. Okay. These are often outside of the community school setting, so the District 75, and they're isolated school with, there could be some communication, of course, between the school building, but typically run independently of the community school. And the rest, of course, further and further away from your corner school, et cetera, your zone school.
Okay. So if my child is placed in an ICT class, does that classify him as special education for the rest of his school career?
No. So two things. A child could be in an ICT class because they happen to be the general education uh, part of the ICT class. Remember, it's a hybrid, it's a mix of students with and without disabilities. Any child who has an IEP has an IEP because they have some sort of disability. Now, it might be that as time goes on, take the example of a speech impairment, a child receives special education services and their speech impediment is no longer as noticeable. So they may not need special education services anymore. Case is closed. There is no continuation of services that IEP does not follow the student. The student received the services. Now, uh, take Joe Biden, who had a speech impediment. He himself will tell you that at some point, sometimes he experiences some trouble with certain speech. It's there. It's no longer noticeable, but it's part of who we are, right? So our disabilities continue with us. We manage them. We learn techniques and ways in which they are less impactful, perhaps, in the way that we function. So they may not become more noticeable, but they're there.
Yeah,
I
that's a
worried about parents who are concerned about this piece because what concerns us as service providers the most is that your child get the service that they need to be able to make progress, so that if there is a possibility of lessening a potential gap in the future, there is less of a gap. So you get services now, the earlier the better the long-term outcomes for you.
okay. A great example too. I mean, yeah, and he's so open about sharing it, and it's just really heartfelt. You can
Yes.
tell how sincere it is. Question: Miss Mejia in the audience is asking, I did not receive a blue letter, but my zone school psychologist already reached out to start collecting paperwork for my child. Do I still need the letter?
You don't need the letter, but you want to find out why you didn't get the letter. You want to make sure that the address is correct, that they have, if you live in an apartment building, that they have the right apartment, because other notices are going to follow that you are going to want to get. So rest assured, the process started. Those notices are important because they also give you um, information about what your rights are and what to expect. So it's a good thing, things are happening. Just double check and make sure why that didn't get to you because it might mean that in the future, some important documents might not be reaching you in the way they should.
Absolutely, absolutely. That correspondence is really critical for the rest of the child's career and all correspondence between you and the school and the Department of Education in general, all offices. And yeah, you can always check with your parent coordinator for starters and call the office. Um, but yeah, no, that letter is important, finding out why it's not there, especially. Miss Puleo in the audience is asking, I was contacted already by the Turning 5 team in December, and I submitted the consent to request for updated evaluations. Now I'm being asked this month to submit a 30-minute survey on my child. Does
Hmm.
this sound correct? And is that time frame the same?
So yes, it sounds correct. There may be, so there are some, the school psychologist will identify what information they may need to complete the what they call, the profile, to complete the paperwork needed. And it might mean that they seek information from you. Now, I think most likely in the past you would have seen this as a social history interview, perhaps, to find out developmental history, to find out your concerns, family history, so they could identify what other evaluations may be required, and also so that they can get a better sense and idea of what your child, who your child might be. So this sounds about right. It is not typical, but I think it might be a reflection of the time that we're living in, where that face to face interview may not happen in the same way. That's my best guess. If you're uncomfortable, you can reach out to the school psychologist and ask the purpose of the questionnaire and why it is relevant to them right now. Also, know that the Turning Five process itself has a bit of a different time frame for evaluations to happen. So, in your typical school, when you start school in your typical school year, you would have 60 days from the time that the opening of the case happened to the time that you have an IEP meeting. But that time is a little bit more flexible um, with the Turning Five process. Um, Depending on when the initiation of the case, the opening of the case happened, and you obviously would have an earlier IEP meeting than people who start later, but it does not necessarily follow the 60 school day rule. So I wasn't sure if you were asking about how stretched out this process feels right now, or if it was just about the questionnaire. I hope I answered the question somewhere in between.
So the question is, if an assistive technology evaluation was done recently, but we haven't received the device yet in the mail, how does it get documented on both IEPs?
So, to be able to get a device that's recommended in an assistive technology evaluation, you must first create an IEP that recommends it. So, if you have the evaluation but no IEP has been created, then you don't have a mandate for that device to be offered. If you have a recommendation for a device in a previous IEP, and this is an update of a continuation, I mean, you would still have to have an IEP meeting to update the type of service that you need and to also make a recommendation for it. So right now you wouldn't be receiving anything unless it's on the IEP. I would suggest that you reach out to the Committee on Preschool Special Education at this point, to schedule a quick meeting. Just, you can say it's a clerical meeting to update the assistive technology. But certainly you do need that meeting, because without that authorization, there's no mandate, there's no requirement, there is no device coming to you.
Yeah, that is key to that. Absolutely. Nothing can happen without it. Quick question. If I know my child is going to be recommended to a District 75 school, do I have to fill out the kindergarten application online?
So the kindergarten application process is ended. And so what you would be able to apply for, if you were to want to do so, would be for a waiting list. So a wait list for the programs that you are interested in. We do recommend that parents go through the kindergarten admissions process for the community school kindergarten, because it's a good way to have a safety seat, frankly. So to have a guaranteed spot somewhere to have your backup just in case something happens. This is especially true for parents who are not 100% sure that their child might need a District 75 placement. If you know 100% my child is going to District 75 placement and it is not worth my while to apply to kindergarten program, that is a valid choice. And that is certainly something to consider.
Thank you. And lastly, actually two more questions. What is the difference between public school 12 to 1 to 1 and a District 75 12 to 1 to 1 class?
That's a really good question. So when you're in a 12 to 1 in a small classroom size in a community school, you have access to all the services from that community school. So you have your big gym, if there's a gym, you have your bigger classes, you have your cafeteria, you have access to students with and without disabilities. If you're in this smaller setting in this bigger school, if you're in a smaller setting in a smaller school where all the children receive special education supports and services, it's a little bit more segregated. That's why it's more restrictive. All the students in that setting in the District 75 program, in the District 75 schools, are children who require um, high interventions, supports and services, more adult supervision, more specialized supports. It signals that these children are in greater need than the children who are in a community school. 12 to 1 program. And so it is really just about the supports that the child requires. And the setting reflects that. So if you need a more protected, supervised, and supportive environment, that's when you go into District 75. If your child is able to manage less supports, but still needs high instructional supports and specialized instruction, then that's when you really look at your community school small classroom size. It's just know that the further you get away from general education, it is because the children require more services and have the schools have an obligation to provide these services in a, I guess, in a more highly structured way.
That is a great question. I didn't know that myself, so thank you, Liliana.
Yeah, of course.
And lastly, before we continue, uh, I'd like to know more about one-to-one para in an ICT setting. Is that an option?
Yes. So remember, services are need driven. They're not driven by what's available. They're not driven by how much it costs. It's driven by what your child needs to make progress. So, say for example, your child has um, toileting needs, right? And they need a toileting paraprofessional. There is no reason why that paraprofessional would not be available in an ICT class, in a general education class, or even in a small classroom setting. The one-to-one paraprofessional is intended to assist the student with their own individual needs that cannot be met by the type of setting where they are. So a highly distractible student who needs redirection, a student whose behaviors need redirection again, a paraprofessional would be recommended for that student on the IEP, and that would be independent of their classroom placement. Now, if you go into a very small classroom setting and the paraprofessional was there to try to prevent a more uh, placement in a more restrictive setting, then you might see that the paraprofessional is removed for the one-to-one because the classroom itself can manage what the original purpose of the paraprofessional was. However, if your child needs it, your child should get it. How does the child get a paraprofessional that's one-to-one and addresses their services? Through the evaluation process. Evaluations, observations from teachers, information that is brought in by people who know your child at the IEP meeting, and then included in the IEP. I hope that answered the question.
I think it did. We'll find
Okay.
out in a minute, won't we?
Ask again if by all of you who are listening, if you find that I did not answer the question, please ask it again. I'm more than happy to try to get to what you wanted to know. Okay,
We
thank you.
do We do have a follow-up question.
Yes.
Can a school decide not to accept my child based on their special needs? Like, will they be able to see my child's IEP before accepting them?
No. So your child's IEP has not been created for turning 5. And when you apply through for the regular kindergarten admissions process, the only pieces that have to do with special education are if you need a barrier-free school, you would have included that in your kindergarten IEP application. So no, schools don't have your IEP. Your kindergarten IEP has not been created. They cannot deny acceptance of a child because they had a previous IEP. So no.
Okay, and can we change a class size after we've been assigned one? For example, a 12 to 1 to 1 to an 8 to 1 to 2 or vice versa?
If you want to make any changes to the IEP program, you have to have an IEP meeting. But yes, of course, if your child's needs change, um, they might and they should as they grow, they develop, they need something else, more services, less services. This is all done through the IEP process. If and no, you should know that you can request an IEP meeting when you think it's necessary. So you don't have to wait until one entire school year has passed and the calendar says it's time for the IEP meeting. If you need changes to service, for whatever reason, make a request in writing to the Committee on Special Education once this process is ended, and you can request another IEP meeting, and the Department of Education must respond.
Underscore must, absolutely.
Must.
Here's a question, and maybe you have some insight on this and maybe you don't, but why is it that the DOE wants us to register for kindergarten on my school's account when most of the kids will have specialized placements with IEPs?
Well, I'm sure there's some sort of logic. Um, and there's some benefits to actually having all eligible 5-year-olds apply. One of them is head count, but I'm sure they have other reasons. What I can tell you is that these two processes are in place. Sometimes they don't feel very logical or intuitive, um, but it's what we call it the ring of fire. Is the ring of fire we need to go through when children are turning 5, and if you're a New York City resident. Yeah. Other than that, my insights are really just not that interesting or scary.
It's kind of like that Tootsie Pop
Yeah,
commercial, the world may never know, especially with the
that's
DOE.
true.
um, Miss Lewis is with us today, and she asked a question that's really critical, especially in response to COVID.
Mhm.
The question is, what about virtual paras? How can you increase a para's hours?
So if you're already receiving virtual services and you have your virtual paraprofessional, there's two ways, and it's a little bit off topic, but I'll take it. You should have received what's called the program adaptations document, a PAD, if your child receives a small classroom services, or a RAD, the related service adaptations document, if your child only really receives related services but is not assigned to a small classroom size, a small classroom. The way to change or modify this PAD or RAD, which is really a description of the services that you should anticipate when your child is receiving remote instruction, is to contact the teacher and or the principal to say, I need a modification to the services, including an increase in the time that the paraprofessional is working with them remotely. That is the easiest way to do it. The second way, and which is a little harder, but certainly more important, and that is that the PAD and the RAD are supposed to reflect the services that are recommended on the IEP. They're not required. They're not supposed to reduce services, and they're not supposed to change services. So they're really supposed to be the way, a description of the way that the IEP services are going to be delivered during remote instruction. So if you want more para hours, first look and see if you can make arrangements with the school to increase those hours. Second, if the school is not in agreement, look at the IEP and make sure that the hours that you are receiving online reflect the hours that are recommended on the IEP for in-school services, because that's what the IEP is for, right? And if you feel that you need more, change the IEP, because the RAD can only reflect the IEP. It can add services needed for remote instruction, but it cannot change or reduce the IEP service.
Right. The rat and
I
the
feel like I'm
pad
talking a
can.
lot.
No, 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 no.
Sorry,
These are
guys.
good questions, especially during COVID. Like you get so many acronyms thrown at you as if there aren't enough as it is. And
Yeah,
it's like all of a sudden, what's a rad? What's a pad? Does that supplement? Does that replace? What does it mean? It's so new. And yeah, I mean the rad and the pad only describes and provides structure to the services being provided and authorized within the IEP. It does not add or take away.
right.
So, so yeah. Uh, I think we have one more question and we can continue. Can anyone challenge at the Turning 5 meeting a diagnosis of autism for a child that would discontinue him from continuing services?
So remember, the IEP itself, the IEP is not a medical document. The IEP meeting is not it's not a medical meeting. So, and these classifications that you have that open the door to special education are just things that Congress thought were a good idea, and they're missing a few. If you disagree with the classification of autism, and remembering that this is the purpose of this classification is to open the door for a child to receive services, you of course can say, I disagree with the classification of autism. Now, it's not a diagnosis. That's something that you have to uh, work with a doctor and clinicians about. It really is just about the classification. There are other classifications that may work for a child who is appears or presents as on the spectrum, but whose parent believes that that is not the case, that will allow the child to receive services, and also, and also be more sensitive perhaps to the process of finding the correct outside diagnoses. So, for example, other health impaired, speech or language impairment, because there may be a communication disorder, or they call it concomitant, a coexisting disability that could also be used as the main classification, as the classification. Um, but so I know this may be just semantics and we may be talking about the same, but just I really want everyone to know we're not talking about diagnoses when it comes to special education, because this is really about creating an education plan. Um, Most of the times when you see a child who needs a service, you might not know that there is a diagnosis or the child has not been diagnosed. You just know that there is a service, and there is a child that presents as someone who might need this type of support. So something similar to autism, something similar to learning disability, even if there has not been a diagnosis, something similar to an emotional disturbance. I know it sounds a little bit strange, um, but it's designed to be able to offer services to children who may have a disability that impacts their learning, but not necessarily to medically define what that disability might be.
Right. And to add to that is that disability is not necessarily locked in at any stage. I mean, it can change. We have seen it change, and you can ask for additional evaluations, or if you don't think the evaluation, there's always a different way to get another one, an independent evaluation.
Mhm.
And we have webinars and trainings on that as well, that will help guide you through that. But yes, and in early intervention and preschool education, it's specifically not set because we don't know. It's too early to tell, and development happens so fast at the younger ages that it allows that flexibility to still provide services without, locking in certain diagnoses, because it might not be something that manifests into what it appears initially. Um, okay, so let's
Shall
see.
we continue? I'll have more opportunity for questions in just a minute.
Yeah, let's continue.
Okay.
Thank you for the questions, guys. Keep them coming. Yes, this is good. This is great.
These are good
Thank you so
questions.
much, Lila.
Thank you. Oops, I went through one. We're reaching the end, so not to worry. There's not that much more information, but there's tons more time for any questions that you have. So we talked about monitoring your mail. This is why. Of course, I skipped through the welcome packet in the fall because it's already kind of late in the year. It's okay if you didn't get it. That's where you would get the dates for the orientation meetings. But again, if you need information about just the process itself, the Department of Education's website also has some very good information that you can, and videos too, that you can take a look at. The notice of referral, which is your blue letter, December and later. So like I said, about next week, if you're starting to get a little itchy about not getting it, get in touch. Verify the address, make sure that it's correct. You might get a pink notice, but only if the case is reassigned. So you get a pink notice of case reassignment letter, and it is only if the school psychologist or the school social worker that was assigned to be your Department of Education representative, your Turning 5 coordinator, if you will, has been reassigned so that you know who you need to speak with. Now, after the IEP meeting, you're going to get something that's called the prior written notice. Along with the IEP. Now, prior written notice is a letter that tells you and summarizes the services that have been recommended on the IEP. I think I'll probably show you one in just a minute. But the idea is for you to be aware that this is going to go into effect, and also to give you an opportunity to appeal if you disagree. Okay. The school location letter sometimes accompanies the prior written notice, or it could come back at a later time. It's a green letter where the Department of Education is going to inform you of a school where they believe the IEP can be implemented. So this is a school that we think your child will be able to go to. So if you are at your IEP meeting, Turning 5 IEP meeting, you were recommended for ICT, general education related services, for a 12-to-1, 12-to-1-to-1 in a community school, more likely than not, this school location letter is just going to say the name of the school that accepted you through the regular kindergarten IEP process. However, if you are recommended for something more restrictive, District 75 setting, or if your community school that accepted you for kindergarten does not have a 12-to-1 or 12-to-1-to-1 program that was recommended on your IEP, you will get a different school on this letter. And this would then be an invitation for you to virtually visit the school unless schools are open later in the year for observation and visit, to ask questions to see if the school can implement the IEP and if it is an appropriate program for your child, one where your child will make progress. You should get this letter postmarked by June 15th. Now, finally, for those students, for those families who applied to the specialized programs, right? The NEST, the Horizon, AIMS, etc., you will get a purple acceptance letter only if accepted. And that purple acceptance letter will give you the name of the school where the program the placement where the program is going to take place, but only if accepted. If you're not accepted, you will not receive anything in the mail. You will just wonder what happened. That was very dark. Now, share your contact information. If you're not getting mail, please contact your CPSC administrator or community coordinator. Tell your Department of Education representative. Speak with your school, with your preschool, to see if they can assist you. If you need to request documents by email, share your email address and consent to receiving information by email. This is actually a really good way to get information, also to organize it later through folders. You get a lot of paperwork during the Turning 5 process and through special education at various times. So one of the things that I always tell parents, if you like paper, I like paper. If you like paper, get a binder, the biggest one you can find, the best one you can afford. Ask for things to be mailed to you or print them out once you get them so that you can organize them in your binder. You will never lose a thing. You will be completely organized. And when you take your binder to your IEP meeting, you will have absolutely everything that you need in one place. This recommendation. You can also do it. My husband is a very tech guy, so he loves all his subfolders in his Google Drive. He organizes everything that way. If then use it, use your email to do that. So share your email address and consent. Create a New York City school account if you haven't. It's a very useful account to have so that you can receive offers of acceptance for your kindergarten placement and other notices. We're not really quite sure how they're going to be using these accounts in the future, but it sounds very promising to be able to have a place that collects all the information, and hopefully that's where they're heading. And then tell your Department of Education representative what your preferences are, mail or email, okay? Now, for parents who are not native English speakers and who wish for translation and interpretation services, now translation services are for written materials, so translation of letters, forms, notices, report cards, important special education documents such as the IEP. You can make a request for translation services, and the Department of Education will respond, especially for those very important documents like the IEP. Interpretation services are for oral interpretation. So when you're going to a meeting, a conference, a hearing, or any other interaction with the school, and you want to have someone who speaks your language interpret so that information flows clearly what you intend, and you understand the information as intended as well, the Department of Education must provide interpretation for free to you. And if you have concerns and you have requested language access services, you haven't received them, or you have not been replied to, there's a way to make a complaint. Hello at schools.nyc.gov, or there's a phone number on the slide, 718-935-2013, to make language access complaints. Now we're back. Oops, we're back for questions. I told you it was quick, and we're nearing the end, and we're going to be talking about resources. So this is your time. If you forgot or you were waiting for something to be spoken, please, now that's the time. Now's the time to say it.
So we have Miss Aponte in the audience, and she's asking, once a recommendation is made, can I request a different District 75 school for my child?
So if you visit, and like I said, visit here with bunny ears, if you virtually review the program, the placement that was recommended, and you discover that it would not be able to implement the IEP, it is not appropriate, your child would not be able to make progress, you have the right to reject that program, that placement in writing. Situations where it would be obvious that you can reject the placement. So the IEP says that the classroom has to, it's 12 children, one teacher in a District 75 setting, for example, and that the classroom has to have a teacher that offers a specific type of support. So teach ABA, or a teacher that is familiar with children with dyslexia, or a teacher, or whatever the IEP says. And when you call the school, you ask, okay, so the IEP says that you need to have a teach program. Is this program teach? And they say no. Okay, well then that placement cannot implement the IEP. It is not appropriate, and you can reject it. You ask additional information about the classroom. So you have a little girl who identifies as a girl and would like to be with other girls in the classroom. And when you ask and you say, at this point, do you have a classroom profile? Do you know who has been recommended to also be in this classroom with my daughter? And they say yes, and say, can you identify, please, what genders are identified? And it's a classroom full of boys. And you're saying to yourself, that is not appropriate. My daughter would really want to have other girls in the classroom. It is not socially or developmentally appropriate for her. Could be different. It could be the opposite. They would prefer to be with a group of only boys. And then there's only girls. You can also say, developmentally, my daughter needs to be socialized with a good number of peers. There are no peers here. And you can reject the classroom for that reason. Other reasons is the IEP says that you should be in a smaller school. And this classroom is in a District 75 program that is in a large campus where there's a lot of shared hallway access and big, shared dining. I say dining, but cafeteria. And you're saying this would overwhelm my child. This is not something that would be appropriate for my child. You can reject it for those reasons. So you really have to find the reasons why this placement would not be appropriate for your child. And that is why you can reject it. So it's a long answer to say, yes, you can reject the program. However, only if there is reason.
Right. A reason is so important here. It's not just because you dislike certain small things. There really has to be a justification.
Yes.
And they are so, I cannot tell you how, and I know Liliana can attest to this, how rigid they are in changing or reassigning. It really has to have a valid reason.
Yeah, it's
Um,
tough.
yeah. We have a question from Ms. Pasternak, and it is, if my child currently has an IEP in New York City and we feel that a District 75 school wouldn't be able to facilitate their medical and developmental needs, would the Department of Education cover the child going to a private special school in Long Island outside of New York City?
So through the IEP process, one of the possible program recommendations is called an NPS, a non-public school, which is a state-approved private school. So yes, if the evaluations show that the child's needs are it's so involved or so unique, or the Department of Education simply does not have a program that could meet those needs, then the Department of Education does recommend private schools. They recommend state approved private schools. Now, specifically the one that you want, it's another process. If what you're looking for is a state approved private school in Long Island and your child's needs require a placement, come with the acceptance letter and say, look, this is the situation. These are all the evaluations the preschool is going to talk about their needs. We don't think that there is anything that the Department of Education can offer. If they agree and you say, okay, here, I have my acceptance letter, then that's a match. If they disagree, then I will go over dispute resolution in just a minute. You have appeal processes that you can use to argue your case. Hopefully it answered the question.
I think so. And we currently do not have any other questions. Does anybody
Ooh,
have any other
that's
questions?
exciting. I have more time, don't worry. I'm gonna go through the last
We have
section.
plenty of time. But yes.
Yep.
Um, but in the meantime, while we're waiting for other questions, I just shared in the group chat, if you have any Spanish speaking families who have a child with a developmental disability like autism, we have a Spanish speaking support group just for them. I posted the link in the chat here. Also, in case you have special Spanish speaking families that are also going through the Turning 5 process and want to understand the kindergarten IEP, Liliana will be with us again. Thank you in advance. Next week, a week from today, at the same time, same place, same setup, except it will be all in Spanish. So yes, we do have a couple of questions. Thank you. Thank you so much for all of your answers. Thank you so much. We're so glad you could come. And can the DOE close your IEP for not having vaccines in place? That's a good question.
No, those are completely different worlds. The IEP is really just to create the special education program, vaccines or no vaccines. So unless you have left the Department of Education and are no longer receiving special education services, no, there's no connection between one or the other. I wanted to add one thing separate from this question, and that is that tomorrow at 9 in the morning, I'm going to be running a question and answer session for anything related to turning 5 and the kindergarten IEP process. The way to register is to go to the Advocates for Children website and look for kindergarten turning 5. Follow the process there. It's rather easy, but it's tomorrow at 9 in the morning, and we'll be conducting, I was looking for the next one, another one next week on Tuesday at 1 in the afternoon. Same idea. You will be able to find that information on the Advocates for Children website. No more questions. Go ahead.
No, there are no more questions, and I think we'll go ahead and give you some time and give everybody back the rest of their afternoon. Thank you so much, Liliana. I'm going to go ahead and post the information for if you would kindly take a survey and just let us know what we did great, what we can do better on. We're always welcoming those suggestions. I'm going to stay on for a few more minutes. We're also going to follow up with an email to all of you who attended today with the slide deck that Liliana had today. I'll have all the links and all of the resources, some additional resources that we have that we think are useful, and a link, of course, to the presentation, which is available on our Facebook page. I want to thank everybody for making the time. Also, if you can take a quick poll, it's just a quick 3-minute poll. It's just to show you how we're trying to think of your needs, especially as we continue through this pandemic, on how to plan future webinars, what are the best times and platforms. We'll go ahead and do that now. And yes, I'm going to stay on. I also want to share with you that tomorrow we're going to have our colleagues from Cuddy Law, who have been here before, presenting on guardianship. Tomorrow they will be here presenting how to navigate special education during COVID-19. That will be at 11 in the morning, and that will be in English and have simultaneous Spanish translation, interpretation. And then something for you to plan as we're thinking about our young ones, especially those turning 5. We want to also include our kids, our little kiddos from 0 to 3. We have the New York Center for Infants and Toddlers presenting on all the ins and outs and in-depth look at early intervention and understanding those services. And then that'll be on February 10th. On February 12th, we will have them as well, the New York Center for Child Development, which is a branch of the same office, and they will be presenting all the ins and outs on preschool special education. So you can learn all about that. And then after that, they're actually, I haven't confirmed a date yet, but I want to go ahead and share with you rather, this exciting presentation that they're also going to present us with, and that is an information session on teletherapy for young children. What is it, the history, how it works, what it looks like. It's more for the early intervention age group, but we can always apply certain aspects to preschool education, such as who receives one-on-one support and related services and SEIT. That will also be in English and Spanish. But yes, I want to thank everybody for being here today. Liliana, thank you so much again. And we will share this slide deck with all of you. Oh, I see you have a couple of questions. Liliana, are you still there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for presenting and answering all of my questions. We hope you have an amazing day. Thank you so much, Miss. And then what is the best way to share your child's supporting documentation during the Turning 5 IEP if the meeting is virtual?
So because you're the Department of Education representative should have already collected that information, they are the ones who need to offer that to you. If you have new information, then ask the representative how they prefer to receive it. Usually they will say, scan and email it. That's probably the best way right now, but they may have a different preference.
All right. Well, those are all the questions we have today. Thank you so much, Liliana. I
My
will see
pleasure.
you soon, and everybody else, I hope to see you soon, whether it's tomorrow or next week or in the near future. Thank you so much. Stay well.
you.
I'm going to stay on for a few more minutes, but everybody feel free to go if you're done, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.